Tim, how are you feeling?
Yeah, I'm feeling like we're quite well set. We've been building up to this for a while. It was 1st of August 2020 that we all started to talk the reparations march in Brixton. So that was me, Kofi, Esther from the Stop the Mangamisi campaign, Kobina, Ade, Marina. We were all there in Brixton. And we started to talk about this, and we've been meeting every week since then, every Thursday. So we're kind of set. We're ready. Yeah.
So what does it look like? What do you think is going to happen on Thursday? I mean, when we talking a little bit about through the process you've gone through up to this point, and what do you think is going to happen?
So, in terms of what's going to happen in court, I don't know how valuable it is to predict, because we're dealing with judges who've been, to some extent, indoctrinated within the system. A system that is kind of premised on infinite growth on a finite planet, and that's sort of what they're there to support. So to put all our expectations in a judge coming out and being sort of revolutionary, I don't think that's what makes sense. I think what we're sure is going to happen on Thursday is that we're going to reveal something. We're going to expose something, and we're going to show quite forensically that the government understands there is a threat to our lives. It's a threat that it is creating itself. That the government knows what needs to be done, and that's partly because it's got the Climate Change Committee to tell it exactly what it needs to do just to fulfill its own statutory obligations, its own legal obligations, which aren't even good enough. And we know that they're not doing it. And it's not just us saying it, that is the Climate Change Committee saying it. So we're able to go to court and lay all of that out. We're able to lay out what the government is saying this is an existential threat to humanity, saying if we don't act now, the consequences will be devastating. Our children will not forgive us. Those are their fine words. We've got it all set out, what they need to do, and we've got that evidence from their own statutory advisors. They're not doing it. So for us, this is pretty basic, this is pretty fundamental. If the courts don't see a problem with that, the courts are ceasing to uphold the rule of law. They're ceasing to operate in the interests of the public, because it cannot be in the public interest that the government knowingly leads us to disaster.
So what do you think is going to be the possible kind of outcome? I mean, they're going to probably just say, well, whatever, we can't do anything, and how do you feel like they're going to kind of worm their way out of this one?
So we know, classically what the government does in this situation is it produces various documents, and they're going to do this again. They've already done it at the last minute. Without leave of the court, they put into evidence their net zero strategy, a 368-page document published just 2 weeks before COP26. And they're going to say, look at this fine document we produced. What are these people doing taking us to court when we have produced this fine document? That is what they're going to say. And so we're going to say, well, yes, thank you for yet another document that nobody is going to read, that is going to be honoured only in the breach, because we've been getting these strategy documents for decades. And that's why our pleadings are so long, because we've gone through them. We're reminding you, of all of those strategy documents, the 10-point plan from last November, the Treasury's net zero strategy, the energy white paper, endless documents. Documents aren't going to save us. We've got past the point where words are what's needed. We need the government to deliver, and they're not doing it. So that is the battle line for the hearing on Thursday. Obviously, we hope to find a courageous judge. You can't guarantee that. There's a lot of politics involved. The courts are under pressure at the moment from the government, who are looking to peel back the power of the courts. Partly goes back to some of that Brexit litigation. So there's a lot of politics involved. It's a difficult thing for one judge sitting up there to come to a conclusion that may have profound impacts for the whole economy of this country. So it needs some courage. And it's quite possible the court will try and find a way out of it. They might try and hide behind procedural flaws in our case. They may say, well, you're not legally represented. That's what a judge has already done. And our answer to that will be, so we're only entitled to uphold our right to life, our right to family life if we're rich. If we're so rich we can afford to pay lawyers, this would be hundreds of thousands it could cost, a claim like this. We aren't able to come in our own right to the court and say, what about our right to life? What about our right to family life? So, I think we've got answers to those questions. But yeah, it's possible the court will try and hide behind some procedural point.
What do you think? Maybe we should move to the...
Sure. And maybe I should take the tea
tea's
bag out of your tea.
Unbelievably small at this point. So what do you think is we can just talk as you kind of move. What do you think is the best possible outcome of what's going to, what's the best possible outcome on Thursday? What's the best thing that could come out of this?
I think it's going to be a good outcome either way, because by going to court, we're holding the courts to account for what they say, that they're there for everyone, and we're going to lay out our strong case. And if the courts don't accept that claim, they don't even agree that it's arguable, then everybody is going to see that this system isn't working. It's not working for us, and we need to take action. We've got to stop making demands. We've got to stop expecting a flawed system and its agents to sort this out. We're going to have to do this for ourselves. So people will see that. Scales will fall from people's eyes. So even that would be a good outcome. It would also be a good outcome if the courts do give us something. And I think the legal pillar here is important. We've got this ongoing narrative. Who are the real criminals? Is it the people who are raising the alarm? Is it the people who are taking a stand for all of us, for life on earth? Is it those people? Or is it the people in the pockets of big business who are looking after their own vested interests and ignoring what the science says, ignoring the demands of this critical moment in history, and the courts somehow in the middle of that? So if we see a shift in that legal pillar, I think that's a very interesting development too. So if in any part of our case, the court says, yeah, this is arguable, even one part of it, even the government's systemic and chronic failure to prepare for the impacts of climate change, the adaptation that is already happening now. The Committee on Climate Change has said quite clearly the UK hasn't prepared even for the minimum impacts of climate change. It's gone backwards in the last 5 years. Well, if the court doesn't have a problem with that, that is a surprising outcome. If it does and we go to the next stage, that's very interesting too. As we know, one of the UK's major contributions in all of this is not its own emissions, it's the role of the City of London, financing 15% of carbon emissions around the world. And we know from the Bank of England's own disclosure that the Bank of England's investments are consistent with 3.5 degrees warming. We know from the Environmental Protection Agency that the FTSE 100 is driving us towards 3.9 degrees warming. Let's call it 4. This is terrorism for the younger generation. It's terrorism for the global south. It's down to this government to intervene, to control finance, to control the City of London. Again, they know what needs to be done. They're not doing it. If the court were to say we have an arguable case on that matter, well, that's obviously huge, saying, yeah, we've got an arguable case that the government must rein in finance and its role around the world. So yeah, there are all kinds of things that could happen. I guess the most likely outcome is the court panics because of the scale of all of this and tries to find some way out of it. I think that is the most likely outcome, but that depends so much on the individual judge. So I don't know how valuable predictions are.
I have never, before a year ago this time, I never even knew where the Royal Court of Justice was. I mean, you do because you're a lawyer and everything, because you have to, but in the United States, and I just got to know Big Ben, the Parliament. But within the last 3 months, I think I've been in that building 5 to 6 times. Why don't you tell me a little bit about how you feel like people that are concerned with climate issues, with civil rights issues, it seems like more and more people are bringing these kind of stories to the Royal Courts of Justice. And maybe talk a little bit about how that there's a transition there and the kind of what the feeling is, both as a lawyer and as an activist.
So, yeah, I think you're right. I mean, the courts are becoming a really important line in all of this. And one of the reasons is we're seeing something, very volatile happening in our politics. I mean, not just in this country, but around the world, everywhere. Whether it's in Ghana, whether it's in US, whether it's in Mexico, all around the world, Brazil, the politics are volatile. And there's a lot of polarization. It could be about COVID, it could be around Brexit, it could be around the environment. And so the idea that actually there's something objectively real here going on, the laws of science, something that is beyond politics, something that is objectively true, well, the courts just feel like they need to be part of that. I mean, in theory, what do we think of with the courts? Court is about evidence, looking at the evidence. And that's what we want to do. It's not because we are on the left or we're on the right. It's, look, this is not working. Objectively, we're heading towards a really bad place. We're already in a really bad place. We're seeing people dying at scale. We're seeing people being displaced at scale. We're seeing communities being destroyed at scale. Look at the evidence. Look at the evidence of the last 200 years of what this belief in infinite growth has meant. So that is why the courts are becoming this battle line. Part of it also is as that ideology is tested, as people call it out and say, look, this is heresy because this is destroying us, you get a kickback from people who say, you're a threat, you're threatening the system. You're challenging it in a way that makes us really uncomfortable. So we're seeing that authoritarian response as well. If you dare call out this corruption for what it is, well, you're not our friend. We need to put you away. People starting to go to prison. The threat of 10 years in prison just for exercising your democratic right to take to the streets, to hold power to account. So that is happening as well. I think what we're seeing is the courts in this middle of, what is going to happen to us now? Are we going to collapse into authoritarianism and repression? Or are people going to stand together in community and take the democracy back and stand up for everything that we know we need together, for life, for compassion, for solidarity. So yeah, this is the courts right on the front line of that. And on Thursday, well, this is the only guaranteed day we have in court. If the court decides they just don't want to hear from us anymore, they can make rulings that mean we don't get another day in court. So it really matters. And there are two parts of it. There's what happens outside court. There's the movement building. There's making it clear that this case is about communities in the global south that are being affected by the government's policies here, who don't get a voice in the Royal Courts of Justice normally, who don't get heard, even when policies are a death sentence for them. So it's really important we make that connection visible. So there will be a vigil for the fallen. There will be a vigil for future generations outside court. But it also matters what happens inside court. And so in a few minutes, I'm going to be talking to Ade and Kobina, two of the claimants who will be with me in court on Thursday. And we will be talking about what they say to the judge. And it's important we get that right. We discuss that together. We don't want to give the other side easy points. If we sound too political in court, if we make big speeches about some of the things that are really happening, the ecocide, the colonialism, makes it too easy. Judge can say, well, this is a political case. I'm not here to judge the politics. So we've got to be careful what we say to the judge. And that's what I'm about to discuss with Ade and Kobina.
What is the story? What's happening right now? What you can kind of make traction and headway on? There's a lot of people. It's all about the momentum too. You know.
Yeah.
And to sustain that momentum and build it from other things happening, right? To borrow and to build, borrow and to build, and be inclusive. You know, I feel like that's a lot of people. A lot of people want to have so much ego that they don't want to be inclusive, and they miss the opportunity, like, to bring other people along. Where there's, you know.
What do you see? No, I think that's a big part of the story as well.
Yeah.
And that sort of individualism in some ways is part of the old paradigm, and the paradigm deliberately and for economic reasons sets us against each other.
Yeah, exactly.
And so the challenge to that paradigm must come from doing the opposite.
Yeah.
I mean, both, you know, sort of intuitively, just as but also intellectually as well. And I also feel it's really important when we do this not to have it about them and us. My belief is that politics begins with the self. And, you know, kind of everything is in all of us. And certainly for myself, I don't know whether everybody's like this, I also, you know, feel sometimes that urge to just retreat to, you know, a Scottish island or something, you know, just to, where's my family going to be safe? Let's just go it alone. Let's just, you know, because this is chaos. And I think everyone understands that sort of bunker mentality. How do I make myself and my family safe, the people I love safe? But we know that type of insular process actually condemns us. And not morally, I mean practically. If that's all we can think about, how to make ourselves safe, then we're all going down together. The only hope for any of us actually is to come together in solidarity. That's the only thing that can save us, you know, logically and practically and politically and in every other way. So if we're not doing that, if we're not finding ways to connect to the communities of resistance around the world that have been going on for centuries, if actually somehow we're part of that, you know, bunker mentality, then we're part of the problem, not the solution. I'm just going to see if I can get logged on now. And here is Kobina. Good morning, Kobina.
Yeah, good morning, Tim. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks. How are you doing?
Yeah, very well, very well. Feels like things are coming together. Looks good.
Feels like it, doesn't it? It does feel like that.
It does indeed.
Ade, is there any chance you could join us with your camera too, just for a minute, because William's here. Ade, your mic is off. Hey, morning.
Morning, I'm sorry.
How you doing?
Technical difficulties, but hi.
Hey.
How are you doing?
Yeah, good, thanks. Yeah, starting to feel, I mean, it's, a couple of days, but we've been working hard for this, haven't we? So it's good to get there. Feeling good. Saying we just don't know how many people are going to turn up. You know, that's just how these things are. Difficult time. You know, it really is quite a difficult time. But if there are obviously more people than are going to get into court, either you or Kobina, or can be somebody else, needs to say priority, please, to global majority for getting into the courtroom. Because if that isn't said, it doesn't happen. But it needs to be said.
Yeah, no, I agree. Because it's like first come, first served. But
yeah.
With that,
And then the real purpose of this meeting, and it is a critical purpose, is to focus on what the two of you are going to say in court on Thursday. I think the most likely... Sorry.
What do you mean by test?
As in, one of the points that's being made by the government and by the previous judge is that we are not properly legally represented. Okay? So to my mind, to be honest, that is complete bullshit. And it's really dangerous as well. It's really trying to say you don't have a right to be here at all unless you are, rich as Croesus, and you can afford to pay, top lawyers, which would be this would be hundreds of thousands to have a full professional legal team come and do this. The scale of the documentation for them to get on top of it really be hundreds of thousands of pounds. To say unless you can do that, you have no right to be here in court at all. What a dangerous argument that is. It's really saying you have no place before the courts. So it's an important argument. But because that's been raised, they might try and test this line that the government has come up with to say, this is really just a cynical ploy on the part of Plan B to raise funds. These the second to fourth claimants aren't really part of this at all. That's what they're saying, isn't it? That's what they're trying to say. And so it may be that the judge decides to test you just a little bit on that and say, well, do you actually know about this case? Do you really know what the risks are? It's possible. So I just want to warn you that I would say that's, unlikely, but it's not impossible. So, don't be shocked if that happens. The reason you're here is because you're both, you're going to be able to handle that really well if it happens, basically. Now, what the government seems to be saying is you can only bring this case when you're dead. Because it's only when you're dead that you can show your right to life has been breached. And that is obviously absurd, but they've also made a legal mistake on the test, because that test of real and immediate risk to life, that comes from a whole different body of case law relating to the police, where the police have been given information that, let's say, someone is at risk from their partner of violence, and the police don't intervene. And you get these legal claims saying the police should have been aware there was a real and immediate risk to life and they failed to intervene. It's called the operational duty to safeguard the right to life. The body of case law we're relying on is something called the framework duty. So where, let's say, you have asbestos, and it becomes apparent that asbestos causes this, hideous, cancer, mesothelioma. It places the government under an obligation to introduce legal and administrative and regulatory measures to protect the people from that threat. That's the body of case law that we're working with. It's called the framework duty. And obviously, the real and immediate risk to life test doesn't apply to that, because where there's a real and immediate risk in that operational sense, it's not like, okay, let's enact a law. It's, we've got to get around to that house, now. So they've got it wrong. But so to speak to that, to the absurdity of that we can only bring this case when it is too late, when the harm has already been done, is a really powerful line to take. But it also allows us to speak to the harm that is already being done. The brothers and sisters who have already fallen, the communities that have already been destroyed. How much longer do you want us to wait? So what I'm saying is, those 2 points, the point that we shouldn't be there in court at all because we're not properly legally represented, the point that we don't meet that definition of victims because we're not dead yet, right? There we can make, we can say a lot of what we want to say, and it's speaking directly to the legal issues. And that will be, in terms of our prospects of the legal case, that will be so much stronger than something that could be interpreted by the court as threatening, as blackmail, as politics. In other words, roughly what you do in court, and this is just the tactics of it, is you expose your opponent for what they are. You don't do that by turning against the court. You turn against the court, you're going to lose, basically. You give the court no choice. So the way we bring the court along, and we do want, I mean, it would be very, very powerful if we do bring the court along with us, when the defendants are the Prime Minister, the Chancellor, and the Business Minister, and we are the global majority. It would be very powerful if anything comes out of this. We know we don't expect it. We know probably the odds are against it. But we also know actually our case is legally strong and legally powerful. So let's not make it harder for the court. So let's focus by exposing our opponents, not turning on the court.